picturesquely around his waist, preparatory to some new performance. I tried furtively to give him a warning look, but in vain. "Isn't he really too absurd for anything?" said Miss Mannersley, yet with a certain comfortable anticipation in her voice. "You know, I never saw anything like this before. I wouldn't have believed such a creature could have existed. Even had I succeeded in warning him, I doubt if it would have been any avail, for, seizing a guitar from one of the musicians, he struck a few chords and suddenly began to zigzag into the center of the floor, swaying his body languishingly from side to side in time with the music and the pitch of a thin Spanish tenor. It was a gypsy love song. Possibly Miss Mannersley's lingual accomplishments did not include a knowledge of Castilian, but she could not fail to see that the gestures and illustrative pantomime were addressed to her, passionately assuring her that she was the most favored daughter of the Virgin, that her eyes were like votive tapers, and yet in the same breath accusing her being a brigand and assassin in her attitude toward his heart. He balanced with quivering timidity toward her, threw an imaginary cloak in front of her neat boots as a carpet for her to tread on, and with a final astonishing pirouette and languishing twang of his guitar, sank on one knee and blew with a rose a kiss at her feet. If I had been seriously angry with him before for his grotesque extravagance, I could have pitied him now for the young girl's absolute unconsciousness of anything but his utter ludicrousness. The applause of dancers and bystanders was instantaneous and hearty. Her only contribution to it was a slight parting of her thin red lips in a half incredulous smile. In the silence that followed the applause, as Enriquez walked pantingly away, I heard her saying half to herself, "Certainly a most extraordinary creature." In my indignation, I could not help turning suddenly upon her and looking straight into her eyes. They were brown, with that peculiar velvet opacity common to the pupils of near-sighted persons, and seemed to defy internal scrutiny. She only repeated carelessly, "Isn't he?" and added, "Please see if you can find Jocasta. I suppose we ought to be going now, and I dare say he won't be doing it again. Ah, there she is. Good gracious! Child, what have you got there?" It was Enriquez's rose, which Jocasta had picked up and was timidly holding out toward her mistress. "Heavens, I don't want it. Keep it yourself." I walked with them to the door, as I did not fancy a certain glitter in the black eyes of the senoritas Manuela and Pepita, who were watching her curiously. But I think she was as oblivious of this as she was of Enriquez's peculiar attentions. As we reached the street, I felt that I ought to say something more. "You know," I began casually, "that although those poor people meet here in this public way, their gathering is really quite a homely, pastoral, and a national custom. And these girls are all honest, hard-working peons or servants enjoying themselves in quite the old, idyllic fashion." "Certainly," said the young girl half abstractedly. "Of course it is a Moorish dance, originally brought over, I suppose, by those old Andalusian immigrants 200 years ago. It's quite Arabic in its suggestions. I have got something like it in an old cancionero I picked up at a bookstall in Boston. But," she added with a gasp of reminiscent satisfaction, "that's not like him. Oh, no, he is decidedly original. Heavens, yes." I turned away in some discomfiture to join Enrique, who was calmly awaiting me with a cigarette in his mouth outside the sala. Yet he looked so unconscious of any previous absurdity that I hesitated in what I thought was a necessary warning. He, however, quickly precipitated it. Glancing after the retreating figures of the two women, he said, "This Miss from Boston is returned to her house. You do not accompany her?" "I shall. Behold me. I am there." But I linked my arm firmly in his. Then I pointed out, first, that she was already accompanied by a servant; secondly, that if I, who knew her, had hesitated to offer myself as an escort, it was hardly proper for him, a perfect stranger, to take that liberty; that Miss Mannersley was very punctilious of etiquette, which he, as a Castilian gentleman, ought to appreciate. But will she not regard love, the admiration excessive? He said, twirling his thin little mustache meditatively. No, she will not, I returned sharply. And you ought to understand that she is on a different level from your Manuelas and Carmens. Pardon, my friend, he said gravely. These women are ever the same. There is a proverb in my language. Listen. Whether the sharp blade of the Toledo pierce the satin or the goatskin, it shall find behind it ever the same heart to wound. I am the Toledo blade. Possibly it is you, my friend. Wherefore, let us together pursue this girl of Boston on the instant. But I kept my grasp on Enriquez's arm and succeeded in restraining his mercurial impulses for the moment. He halted and puffed vigorously at his cigarette, but the next instant he started forward again. Let us, however, follow with discretion in the rear. We shall pass her house. We shall gaze at it. It shall touch her heart. Ridiculous as was this following of the young girl we had only just parted from, I nevertheless knew that Enrique was quite capable of attempting it alone, and I thought it better to humor him by consenting to walk with him in that direction, but I felt it necessary to say, I ought to warn you that Miss Mannersley already looks upon your performances at the Sala as something outer and peculiar, and if I were you, I shouldn't do anything to deepen that impression. You are saying she is shocked, said Enrique gravely. I felt I could not consciously say that she was shocked, and he saw my hesitation. Then she have jealousy of the senoritas, he observed, with insufferable complacency. You observe, I have already said it is ever so. I could stand it no longer. Look here, Harry, I said, if you must know it, she looks upon you as an acrobat, a paid performer. Ah, his black eyes sparkled. The torero, the man who fights the bull, he is also an acrobat. Yes, but she thinks you a clown, a gracisco di tetro. Then I have make her laugh, he said coolly. I don't think he had, but I shrugged my shoulders. You know, he said cheerfully. Look, he began with a laugh, he may finish with a sigh. I turned to look at him in the moonlight. His face presented its habitual Spanish gravity, a gravity that was almost ironical. His small black eyes had their characteristic irresponsible audacity, the irresponsibility of the vivacious young animal. It could not be possible that he was really touched with the placid frigidities of Miss Mannersley. I remembered his equally elastic gallantries with Miss Pinky Smith, a blonde Western belle, from which both had harmlessly rebounded. As we walked on slowly, I continued more persuasively. Of course, this is only your nonsense, but don't you see, Miss Mannersley thinks it all in earnest and really your nature. I hesitated, for it suddenly struck me that it was really his nature. And hang it all, you don't want her to believe you a common buffoon or some intoxicated muchacho. Intoxicated? Repeated Enrique with exasperating languishment. Yes, that's the word that shall express itself. My friend, you have made a shot in the center. You have ring the bell every time. It is intoxication, but not agaudiant. Look, I have long time an ancestor of whom is a pretty story. One day in church he have seen a young girl, a mere peasant girl, pass to the confessional. He look her in her eye. He stagger. Here Enrique wobbled pantomimically into the road. He fall. He would have suited the action to the word if I had not firmly held him up. They have taken him home, where he have remained without his clothes, and have dance and sing. But it was the drunkenness of loaf. And look you, this village girl was a nothing, not even pretty. The name of my ancestor was Don Quixote de la Mancha, I suggested maliciously. I suspected as much. Come along, that will do. My ancestor's name, continued Enrique gravely, was Antonio Hermenegildo de Salvetra, which is not the same. These Don Quixote of whom you speak exist not at all. Never mind. Only, for heaven's sake, as we are nearing the house, don't make a fool of yourself again. It was a wonderful moonlight night. The deep redwood porch of the Mannersley parsonage, under the shadow of a great oak, the largest in the Encinal, was diapered in black and silver. as the women stepped upon the porch.